Hello, my name is Florian Hoedt. I work at the Thünen Institute, which is a federal research institute located in Germany. I myself am a geoinformatics Master of Science. I studied this at the interfaculty department at the University of Salzburg. My base degree is in Bachelor of Science in Land Use and Nature Conservation. And so I have a quite broad understanding of landscape and land use and know about agriculture and forest ecosystems. And as part of this, with my broad education, I'm the head of geoinformatics in the Thünen Institute and lead the working group Geoinformation. The Thünen Institute itself does research in a 3x3 matrix. We look at forests, seas, and in fields, and take the view of ecology, economics, and technology, and try to find new clues how to better use and manage the landscape. And as a federal research institute, we are also a part of the NFDI4Agri consortium, which is led by Z itself. I will now talk about our idea how we could unlock the agricultural data silos, which are currently in the research domain, and will more take the, not like what we all have done up to now, but more like what are the next steps. And I would really like to hear feedback, what the geoinformation science community thinks about our ideas. But before I will start to talk what we do, I would just shortly talk about why. And as some of you may already have heard in yesterday's talk from David Gackstetter, agriculture is important. So, for example, agriculture and forest science are an essential factor for achieving the sustainable development goals we all have agreed upon in a manifold of ways. For example, if we just look at food production, we see that while we are dependent on providing enough food, we also should have to keep the environmental impact low and staying economically reasonable, and should be resilient against external factors like a drought. To produce enough food, we also use vast amounts of space, which needs to be balanced against other land use needs. And all of this leads to a very complex system. And very broadly speaking, complex systems are mostly good suited for optimization. And to pinpoint which optimizations are useful in terms of the sustainable development goals, we need science. This was our motivation to ask the community how we could leverage this optimization potential. And we conducted a community survey and established the current status quo. And the current situation in the agri-science domain is characterized by a wide range of infrastructures, which in parts do only provide limited open access to the scientific data which resides in them. And the data itself is hard to find and even harder to combine. So in a nutshell, our data silos are unfair, or at least not fair enough. And even though we have plenty of them and the infrastructures themselves are very good, like EDAL for genomics data, the soil and forest inventories at the Thünen Institute, or Bonares, the Center for Soil Research at the South, Terreno, Federated, Edafobase, and so many more, scientists cannot leverage the full data potential because it's complicated, because as I told you, data or science needs data, but data is unequal data because which data is required and how. And our community survey identified that which data is present in our research domains and showed us that among all the other NFDI consortia unicorns, because we are all very special and have special needs and have diverse data and cover complex topics, we as NFDI4Agri are some kind of a special unicorn because our data is maybe even way too diverse. We cover data from soil to meteorological data, over genomic data. We have LiDAR scans, we have laboratory information logs, sometimes as books, or we have canopy classifications out of the forest areas. And we cover economic statistics and at least sometimes even the earthworms themselves. Just all this is the data we need to understand how agricultural spaces could perform better in all the areas of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we need to combine this wide range of heterogeneous data sets. And then we ask ourselves, so where to start? And knowing where we come from, we need to define a target. This is necessary to draft the path we want to pursue to get there, which is just a metaphor for our proposal, by the way. And our path to unlock the data silos is based upon the following overarching goals. We want to set up an infrastructure for agricultural research data by identifying and connecting available disciplinary repositories to make research data available in a fair way. And this is important. We want to identify and connect available disciplinary repositories. We do not want to create a new repository. Our design, we want to design a search portal as a central access point for the searching of agricultural data, which enables semantic queries within the data pool of federated infrastructures. We want to ensure research data quality via domain-specific measures of quality control and set up a quality feedback and curation system. And because agriculture is sometimes a topic which has privacy issues, we want to discuss these privacy issues and discuss ethical standards and develop guidelines for handling sensitive data. And nonetheless, and this is very, very important, just as the speaker before has told you, we want to form a community to adequately react to future developments as a by design feedback cycle for our measures, because people are important. It's most of the time, it's not the technology which is the issue, but the people who use them. So we know the target, we know where we come from, and now we want to guide our path to find the right path, find the right route. And we decided to follow the commonly known FAIR principles, which is nothing special for an NFDI guideline, by the way. It's just good practice and should be, we shouldn't need to discuss this. But even though making agricultural data fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable will be hard enough, our community survey showed us that we need to have more than fair data. As stated before, one key aspect is to provide assured quality data sets which are legally sound and in which metadata is described how you can use them, both in terms of scientifically accuracy as legally correctness, because it doesn't make sense to have the data findable, but you don't know how to legally use them, which could be a part of reusability, by the way. Furthermore, our infrastructures should be scalable by design, since our survey showed that the ForAgri community will grow and the data will grow too. So we need something which is scalable. And a guideline we currently cannot fully employ in our proposal is to secure long-term preservation of this data. We actually had an idea how to achieve this in a federated infrastructure, but the latest news is that the NFDI Directorate itself decided that this is a topic for them to tackle and not for the currently in funding or in proposal phase NFDI consortia. And now to how to actually get there. So let's start with a bird's eye view on our approach. The NFDI4Agri consortium will work in 6 dedicated task areas, each focusing on well-defined measures to move us along our path to Fairness Plus. Our project office and coordination unit, which is mostly set up by itself, does provide internal coordination as service, like complying to reporting requirements and controlling for the other task areas. As said, NFDI4Agri follows a community-driven approach. This is ensured in task area 2, the agricultural community, by extending the scientific community network around NFDI4Agri by involving the community in its activities, and finally, by reflecting with and anchoring developed services inside the community itself. The third task area focuses on the definition of the domain-specific elements of data quality, the corresponding measures of this quality, and the identification of methods for data curation in agricultural research as an integrated part of fair reusability of data. In the fourth TA, we will conceptualize and design the fundamental interoperability and service framework for NFDI4Agri. This is very important because, as told, we have a federated approach and we need a fundamental framework to build upon. This will be the common foundation on which TA5 will, this knowledge will TA5 use to build infrastructures upon and components upon to enhance the current established infrastructures. And last but not least, TA6 will provide legal consulting and guidelines for data usage to help scientists to choose appropriate licenses. So since we are techno-optimists in here, which tend to talk just to tech, I would like to emphasize again and first show our approach of community feedback cycles, because as told you, who needs software? It's the people. So this is one measure of task area 2, the community task area. And it's called user needs and feedback. In this measure, we will conduct surveys and organize hackathons and workshops to evaluate and further specify, for example, service adaptations and developments. Those will be communicated to the other TAs, or if a far-reaching decision should be discussed, will be escalated to our steering committee and worked upon in the board next to it. To close these feedback cycle, the NFDIHAgri services will be adjusted, and then we'll go back into new surveys and new hackathons or workshops to further evaluate and specify the needs. So this is an always ongoing process, which should secure that our services provided are actually useful for the community. So, however, since we are technically worth the tutorial, I will now focus on the technical measures we will apply to achieve our goals, since this is something I really would like to hear your opinion about. So we will start with the concept stage of task area 4, the framework and standards task area. One of the measures, the first measure of task area 4, will provide a comprehensive inventory of data formats for the representation of agronomic digital data and resources. This is important because even if we get funded, the funding will start in the end 2021, and we now don't know what will be the state of the art then. So we have to keep us updated. The second measure will be built upon this inventory to derive concepts closer to software development for interoperability and data exchange. This will enable 4.3 to draft workflows and services for technical interoperability of these resources and frameworks for reproducible modeling and data analysis. Meanwhile, publication and data handling standards are developed which establish high findability in measure 4.4. All of this work from task area 4 will be used by task area 5 to actually develop and provide these services. Since existing agricultural research data infrastructures are currently not interconnected, which hampers findability and reusability of already published datasets, Measure 5.1 will design and establish a middleware of services to enable harmonized access to domain and cross-domain data resources. These interfaces will enable metadata exchange, infrastructure property querying, and provide the access to the data. Measure 5.2 will use the middleware to provide a central access point and inventory of services and data. It's just a bit like our idea is that Measure 5.2 will create something like the Inspire portal, which is the search interface to query the data which lies in the edge infrastructures all over Europe. To integrate current and enable new infrastructures to join the NFDI4Agri data pool, Measure 5.3 will develop open software components. These will be easily installable and based upon existing projects and initiatives, for example, the EDAL project or the OSGeo project GeoNode I had a brief talk yesterday about, which is the technical basis for TISTA. One identified challenge or broadly discussed topic in this conference is to enable process chain or process sharing opportunities and provide pre-integrated data containers like the GDAL cubes we heard about. Measure 5.4 will provide such technology as an infrastructure to make it easily installable on premise and make this potential usable by the scientists in the agricultural domain. So with all these measures in place, the federated service topology should later look like the following. So I will start with the status quo. Currently, we have many different data providers which provide data and acquire data, and they currently use long-term committed, specialized but heterogeneous data repositories like, for example, Bonares or EDAL and many others. We will make those interoperable by homogeneous unified data interfaces and services, which we call the NFDI4Agri components, which are developed in task area 5. Those components should be placed next to existing repositories to connect them. And on top of this, we have a, technically speaking, very slim portal, which will be the central access point for search queries or for everything we in the federated edge computing architecture provide as service, and provide overarching services like the feedback and curation service and service monitoring for the healthiness of these services. And this portal will then be accessed by harmonized interfaces out of the whole NFDI or the international community of scientists, and the scientists, the data, the data provider too, so they can use this too. So this was my view and my idea, or not our idea of the NFDI4Agri consortium and how we want to unlock the agricultural data silos. And I'm eager to hear your ideas and your opinions of our concept. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Florian, for your very interesting talk, your very detailed talk, and I think it was very interesting also to see the links between the two different NFDI approaches we were able to listen to today. Are there any questions from the audience?
Yes, Albert Remke from 52 North. Hi, Andreas. So my question would be about the stakeholder community in NFDI4Agri. So is there a clear concept of the stakeholders, or is it clear which stakeholders are on board and shape this infrastructure? So, for example, is it let's say the research community in the narrow sense of members of universities and research organizations, or what's about the industry in agriculture, for example, and the public sector? So are these stakeholders you're considering, and are they involved in the development of this infrastructure? And even within the research organizations, so when we're talking about infrastructures in this context, then I think we already have a different meaning of infrastructure in mind, as when talking about infrastructure in the sense of storage and computing capabilities and networking. So when we talk about this kind of, well, these parts of infrastructure, then it's clear this is a role of a computing center to support. And in the past, we had a clear separation of responsibilities between the researchers and those who provided the infrastructure in that sense. And but if we look at the requirements today, for example, the FAIR principles, let's take being able to find information resources. Then this is about metadata, but well, who's responsible for metadata? Is it the researcher, or is it the one more responsible for infrastructure components? What's the responsibility or the role of libraries, for example? How can we persist infrastructure components to support the maintenance and the provision of metadata in a network in our community, which is perhaps not as clear regarding the boundaries of the stakeholder community, interwoven with other infrastructure concepts and realizations. So how can we persist this, and what's the role of libraries, for example, in this context? So question is about the stakeholder community. Is it clear who are the stakeholders in this context? And isn't this aspect of the roles of stakeholders, enablers, providers, users, isn't this organizational aspect a very important thing as well to be tackled in the concepts of developing this infrastructure?
Thank you for the two questions. You should see my screen still, do you?
Yeah.
Okay. So one slide I haven't shown you is who we actually are. If you ask about the infrastructure providers, in our community survey we split the questionnaire. So we had one for the data providers, which are the scientists and technicians which acquire the data, and we had one for the infrastructure providers. And the co-applicant institutions are relatively broad. For example, if you talk about libraries, we have as infrastructure provider and as big library ZBMed in our ranks of co-applicants. And inside the different federal research institutes, we also have not only researching staff, but also librarian staff, like in the JKI, for example. And I myself, as part of the Center for Information Management, our department is split into information technology and library. So we have this broad domain covered in the co-applicant stage already. But to these co-applicants, there are also participants. these participants have, for our community in the task area 2, the community task area has asked them if they have any kind of use cases they want to describe, and NFDI4Agri should solve their use case because they see issues. And in this huge range of participants, you can see, if you read all of them, that there is no commercially active entity. This is quite simple because the DFG guidelines don't provide funding for for commercially active entities. So, for example, we wanted 5to N 50to as participant, and we couldn't because you work commercially, and therefore we can't take you up in the ranks of the participants, which is a pity, and for the agricultural domain is a risk, because agriculture mostly is land use and is private, and there are loads of farmers which produce data in smart farming, and this is a huge bunch of data we should acquire somehow and make also fair. We have some ideas, as talked about yesterday with David Gagstetter, to, in our time of the funding, to use a part of the flex funding, or to talk to the people and do stuff with the more commercially entities like the DKE with the Agri router, to provide an interface to land machine data like an harvester on the field or stuff like that. But in the this proposal phase, we can't go we can't incorporate them as far and as deep as we would like. So, but it's an issue of the DFG guidelines and none of ours. We would like to do so. Nonetheless, we have, through some of the universities of applied sciences, we have indirectly some farmers in our consortium. For example, the University of Applied Science in Höxter, the THOVL, they have some farms, some commercially active farmers, which they cooperate with, and so we have them indirectly in our consortium. This to the first question. And the second question, I think this is a question about the governance and the structure of our governance. Since we are a quite diverse and heterogeneous consortium, we have decided to have a quite it consists of many parts, of many boards, our governance structure. For example, the community board is more or less open for everybody, which is interested in the shape of NFDI4Agri and wants to get informed about what's the latest news. And the community board is the place where I would see not only scientific contributors, but also body entities or legal bodies which are commercially active, and those could then advise the steering committee to do certain things and to form and shape the NFDI4Agri consortium and our services.
I have a final question to Florian, and maybe also for Peter. But one slide, Florian, raised my attention, where you showed the different processes and information flows in measure 2.2, I think.
This?
Exactly, this one. So what I found interesting and quite straightforward is your plan to involve the larger community. You said you would like to conduct surveys, do hackathons, etc., to get the user needs. My question here is, how do you plan to manage the user expectations? So I could imagine if you have a large community and now you say, hey, community, please tell me what are your needs. We will collect them and do something with it. You may raise the expectation that the larger community or the individuals might think, okay, if I mention my needs, they will be implemented in one way or the other. Which might probably not be the case. And so I could imagine that at the very beginning, there will be some enthusiasm and many activities ongoing and a lot of participation. But as soon as the broader community maybe see that maybe things are develop slower than they expect, or other things might be prioritized, this might change. So do you, question is, do you have already a kind of idea how to handle these expectations, how to interact with the community concerning this this question?
Yeah, I will start. We actually have experienced this firsthand with the task area 2, asking the community for use cases. We've got, I think, about 40 use cases, different use cases, which covered many things which are just out of scope. And we had to tell those parts of our community that the ideas they have are valid and good, but out of scope for our first funding phase. Maybe there is a second funding phase, we don't know. But nonetheless, these ideas themselves are good information, because they show you what's the viewing angle of your community. And I think if you say it's out of scope, you must be transparent why it's out of scope. And this is something we have to do. We have to talk a lot. You have to talk to the people, and that's the reason why we want to have hackathons and workshops, to have them around us and have a direct communication with them. And yeah, we need to get good at it. It's hard, I know. I'm also a project steering committee member of the OSGeo project GeoNode, and it's a huge project. We have thousands of issues and pull requests and whatnot, and it's hard to manage this, and also to go out to the users and tell them that some great ideas are hard to implement. But I hope that in the end, we have a community which is so good connected that if inside the community there are some research projects which cover a very specific part of the infrastructure, maybe there's some funding out of the federated infrastructure which will then foster a better infrastructure for everybody. So this is my hope. It's the idea I also follow for the Thünen Institute Spatial Data Repository, where we as GeoNode user contribute little to a big open source project, but since we are not alone, the project itself gains steam and moves forward.
Okay, many thanks, Florian, also for this analogy to the open source community and the open source processes.